Well, hello, lovers of freedom. This is Jacob Hornberger. This is the Jacob Hornberger Show, and it's nice to be back with y'all. Sorry I missed you last weekend. I had another commitment, but it's good to be back with you this weekend to spend an hour with you this Saturday night to breathe pure, unadulterated freedom air here. It's sort of an hour respite from the statism under which you have to suffer, 7 days a week. This gives you an hour away from all this. You're sort of like your freedom oasis. And it's nice to be back spending this hour with you. Last week I had the good fortune of having a birthday, and I got a lot of nice birthday wishes on Facebook from my friends there, and I started to answer them individually and say thank you for thinking of me, and nice note, but like they were lots and lots and lots, and I figured, this is going to take a very long time to say thank you individually to everybody, so I had to settle for just a general thank you. I hope you'll understand. And I appreciate your good wishes. I tell you, it's heck, man, turning 39. God, where does life go when you're having such a good time? And what better time than you can have in life than battling to restore freedom in this country? And I've had the good fortune of doing that, and it's very gratifying. Last week I also had the good fortune, I don't think he meant it as a birthday present, but good fortune of reappearing on Judge Napolitano's Freedom Watch. And, I love doing that show because it gives you an opportunity to just speak libertarian positions, pure libertarian positions, and the host isn't going to get upset and the producer's not going to get upset. In fact, it's sort of like what they want to hear on that show. And so the topic was tax cuts for the rich. Should they be extended or not? And, of course, they know my position. We never get mired down in this ridiculous type stuff of, should there be a tax cut for the rich? Should it be extended? And should it be for the middle class? And, we just take a pure, uncompromising stance when it comes to freedom, and that means we don't believe in the income tax. And Judge Napolitano knows that, and so and he asked me about it, and that's what I said. I said we need to get this thing abolished, ditched, and he said, what do you think our chances are on achieving such a thing? I mean, we've all been born and raised under this thing. And so it's almost like we feel like it's a necessary, inherent, permanent part of our lives, but it's not. And like I told the judge on the show, I said, look, all over the world, there's people that are demonstrating and they're protesting. They're waking up, to the principles of democracy. They're resisting dictatorship, including dictatorship that has been supported by the U.S. government with the revenues that come through income taxation. And I said, look, there's absolutely no reason why that kind of awakening can't take place here in the United States. Now, obviously, those people in the Middle East are dealing with a very basic principle of freedom, political freedom, the right to vote, the right to oust your rulers peacefully in elections. That's sort of a no-brainer for Americans. I mean, we understand the principles of democracy, the principles of elections. It's not a perfect system by any means. You got, of course, the Democratic Republican Party, the monopoly party, that locks out of the political process with ridiculous campaign donation restrictions and petitioning requirements. They lock out of the process, third-party candidates, independent candidates, and it is one party. It's no different from the Chinese Communist Party in terms of monopoly. It's one party divided into two wings, the Democrats and the Republicans. It's sort of like the NFL, two divisions, one league, two divisions. Well, you got this big monopoly party, and but by the same token, it is possible to get people with libertarian perspectives into office. Ron Paul's a perfect example. And so, for the importance of elections, Americans basically have a sound understanding of that and appreciation for it, unlike people in other parts of the world that have suffered under authoritarianism for so many years. But they're waking up. But what the big obstacle for Americans is their lack of understanding when it comes to the principles of economic freedom. And so what I was saying to the judge is that if Americans ever wake up, like people around the world are waking up to the principles of democracy, if Americans start waking up to the principles of economic liberty, to the libertarian roots of this country, to our heritage of economic liberty, then all of a sudden, I got a feeling that as the American people start to stir, everybody around the world is going to just stop dead in their tracks, and they're going to just look in awe at this rumbling giant of the American people that are now starting to, reflect upon, question the socialism, the interventionism, and the imperialism to which they've permitted this country to fall. And if that day ever comes, it's going to be one of the most exciting days and periods of life that one can ever imagine. And so it can happen. That's what ideas are about. That's why these dictators in the Middle East shut down the internet, and they shut down, Twitter and Facebook and so forth, and the cell phones, because they understand the power of ideas, the transmission of ideas, the power of that, the energy of that. And that's, of course, what we're doing at the Future of Freedom Foundation, where I serve as president, the other libertarian foundations, the think tanks. We're introducing into the marketplace of ideas libertarianism, libertarian principles, with the idea that those ideas have consequences. They get into people's minds, people start reflecting on them, and then we keep massing our numbers in the libertarian movement until we overcome the statists. And, of course, as I've said previously on this show, the statists are the liberals and the conservatives. They act like, oh, there's this big difference. Oh, liberals versus conservatives. It's just such nonsense. And one of the good examples of this is this issue of income tax. I mean, what's the burning issue of, liberals and conservatives? They're over there talking about, tax cuts for the rich. Should they be extended? Well, this is ridiculous. That's their only battle. Notice that they don't question the income tax itself. I mean, that's what's really fascinating about this. They don't question that, the principle that there should be an income tax at all. They both accept that. And the idea, of course, is because they believe that government legitimately should have the power to seize people's incomes. And so in principle, there's really no difference between a liberal and a conservative. They'll fight over whether there should be, tax cuts for the rich or tax cuts for the poor, but by and large, it doesn't make any difference because they both believe in this seizure of income. Now, enter the libertarians. We believe that people should be free to keep everything they earn, that there should be no taxation on income at all. And so the battle really is between the libertarians and the statists. It's not between the liberals and the conservatives because they share the same perspective. The battle is between the liberals and the conservatives. Now, it's important that when we start thinking about America and the situation facing our country, that we go back to first principles. I mean, that's important. And whenever your life sort of is in disarray, you go back to basic principles. And there's no question that things are in disarray in this country. You've got, government spending out of control. They're spending, now, $1.5 trillion more than what they're bringing in. They got the federal debt is soaring, and they're already going to cave. Mark my prediction. They're going to cave when it comes to raising that debt ceiling, to increase the debt under which this government is suffering. You've got, the Federal Reserve printing money like there was no tomorrow, debasing the currency. You got government assaults on civil liberties increasing. You got the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan ongoing. Things are a real mess everywhere you look. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, immigration. Whatever the federal government touches, it's in disarray. It's a mess. It's crisis, chaos. So when that happens, we go back to first principles. Now, what are the first principles we go back to? Well, it's a good start is to go back to the founding documents of this country. And one of those is the Declaration of Independence. And among the critical phrases in there is the idea of fundamental rights, that mankind has been endowed with certain inherent, fundamental, God-given natural rights. That is to say, these are rights that don't come to people from the government. The government doesn't, bring you into existence. It doesn't cause you to be born. This is that you're brought into existence by God or by nature. It's a process independent of government intervention. And when you come into life, you come in with certain inherent rights with which no government can legitimately interfere, not even a democratically elected government. That is to say that these rights are immune from control and regulation. Let me give you an example, basic example every American can understand. That, we favor democracy, the idea of voting, electing people to public office and so forth, and changing people in office. But we would never, ever say, well, let's let the majority rule on where we go to church. Okay, well, why not? Why not have the majority say, okay, whoever's, let the majority vote on people going to be Catholic or Protestant or atheist or whatever. Hey, and if you don't like the results, you get involved in the political process. You help your candidate out, get your people into office. We wouldn't go along with that. Most Americans, if not all Americans, would not go along with that. Why? Because we take the position, stretching back to the Declaration, that there are certain rights that are inherent, fundamental. They're immune from democratic votes, democratic controls, government infringement. People have a right to decide whether they're going to go to church or not, and where they're going to go to church. This is none of the government's business. It's nobody's business. It's your own personal decision, the decision of your family. We say the same thing with respect to what we read, what we write. This is no business of government. Even if 95% of the electorate says, "Hey, we don't want people reading books on Marxism or on free market capitalism." Well, that's tough because you have a fundamental right to read whatever you want to read. Well, what separates the libertarians out from the statists, the conservatives and the liberals, is that we put what you do with your own money in that same category. That is to say that what you accumulate in your life in terms of your work and what you do in life, that money belongs to you. It is your right to decide what to do with it. It doesn't belong to the majority. It doesn't belong to society. That you're brought into existence through nature or God, and you have certain talents and abilities and interests and passions. You nurture these. You hopefully discover at a young age what you want to do, and you develop those talents. And ultimately, when you enter the workplace, you offer your services to others, either as an employee or opening up a business or becoming a singer or an actor or whatever. And these are talents and abilities that belong to you, that they're not endowed in you by the government. And in the process of doing this, in this process, you trade with others. You say, hey, I offer you my services, or I offer you this thing for sale, and you enter into these exchanges. And through these exchanges, most of which involve money as the common medium of exchange, you start accumulating wealth, and you make an income. That income belongs to you. It is the fruits of your talents, of your abilities, of your interests, of your passions. And that what you do with your money is no different in principle than where you decide to go to church or what you decide to read. And this is what separates out libertarians from the statists. That we believe that your money belongs to you. That's a fundamental right to decide what to do with it, whether it's to share it, in donations to people, to the church, or invest it, or save it, or provide for your retirement, or help your parents out in their old age. That this is what freedom is truly all about: the right to keep your own money and you decide what to do with it. Now, it shouldn't surprise you then that when the Constitution calls the nation into existence in 1787, the American people did not have an income tax. I mean, duh. They didn't believe in this kind of junk. They believed in fundamental rights. So from 1787, all the way to the early part of the 20th century, imagine people lived without any income tax, with one exception when Abraham Lincoln imposed an income tax during to fund his war against the Confederacy. But with that exception, I mean, throughout the 19th century, Americans lived without an income tax. Now, we all know that there were, severe bad things that were happening during the 19th century. Nobody questions that. Slavery, tariffs, lots of minor exceptions. But nobody can, exceptions to liberty, but no one can deny that Americans lived without income taxation during that entire time. Now, people say, oh, well, Jacob, you couldn't have a government without income taxation. Well, let me tell you something. From 1787 to the early part of the 20th century, when there was no income taxation, take my word for it. Just look in the history books. There was a federal government the entire time. Now, it was this is one of the reasons why America was called exceptional, because it was an exception to the rule. I mean, countries, regimes all over the world had always seized people's income to fund their operations. I mean, today, like when conservatives say America's exceptional, America's exceptional. I mean, they're talking about America being exceptional because the government's out there torturing people and kidnapping people and renditioning them to dictatorial regimes like Egypt, where they can be tortured, invading countries, occupying countries, bases everywhere. That's what they refer to as exceptional, along, with the Social Security, the Medicare, all the socialist programs. Well, back in the 19th century, the reason Americans considered America exceptional then was that there was no income taxation, no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no drug war, no torture, no invasions, no occupations, no empire, no military-industrial complex. I mean, no immigration controls, very few economic regulations, no public schooling. This is why Americans considered the country so exceptional, because it was so different. And one of the primary differences was no taxation on income. Imagine, people were free to keep everything they earned, and there was nothing the government could do about it. Nothing. I mean, you just go out and they start making money as an employee or open up a business. They didn't have to worry about the IRS. They didn't need to worry about keeping their little deductions and getting their little reports and going to the post office and make sure they get the postmark on April 15th. None of that. They were sovereign. I mean, imagine how sovereign and supreme you could be if you just kept everything you earned and there was nothing the government could do about it. And there was not even an IRS to scare you and intimidate you to death. This was a very unusual society. And guess what? It was also the most prosperous society in history. When people were free to accumulate everything they earned, there was the most unbelievable soaring of income, of standard of living that mankind has ever seen. Now, this may surprise some of you, because I know that if you went to public schools and to your state-supported universities and college, you got the same tripe I got about how the Industrial Revolution was horrible and how American men hated their children and sent them into the factories, and how they hated their wives and sent them into the factories, 12, 13 hours a day, and that it was only the federal government that loves the people, that saved the wives and the children from these hateful, abusive husbands that were doing this to their children and their wives. I mean, you've heard the tripe, if you went into the same kind of schools that I went to. Well, that's what it was. It was tripe. There was a reason why people were sending their spouses, and the whole family was going in. Why? Because there was so much poverty that this was the only way they could sustain their lives. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, and that's the real comparison. Statists compare the Industrial Revolution to today. That's the wrong comparison. The right comparison is the Austrian school of economic thought, the people like Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek. As they have pointed out, the right comparison is the one between the Industrial Revolution and the period that came before the Industrial Revolution. And that was the period where, people would have like 10 children in the hopes that 2 or 3 would survive into adulthood, because life was very short. People would die of disease or famine, or all kinds of horrible things, just because the poverty was so incredible and the illness and so forth. Well, all of a sudden the Industrial Revolution comes along, and all of a sudden the capital base starts increasing. People start doing better. In the beginning, when there's not a lot of prosperity, sure, people have to still work in the factories, but it provided them with an opportunity to survive. I mean, it wasn't because fathers hated their children that those children were in the factories. It wasn't because they hated their wives. It was because they loved them. This was their way to survive. And then as the prosperity started to increase decade after decade, that's what enabled children to stay home and live a more normal life in childhood, and let the wife stay at home and so forth. Now, what was bringing that into existence? Well, this is a fascinating economic principle. It's one that liberals, unfortunately, have a very blind spot. You know how liberals say, oh, they're looking for a cure for poverty, and oh, we want a war on poverty, we want a war on poverty, and you know how they look at libertarians and we want to cancel welfare state programs, and they say, oh, you hate the poor, you hate the poor. Well, where liberals have a real blind spot is that they don't understand that libertarians, and specifically the Austrian school of economic thought, has already come up with the solution to poverty. You see, the solution's been found. It's over. It's just that they don't want to admit it. They don't want to confront it. They don't want to talk about it. And that solution was found, perhaps inadvertently, but perhaps not, because Adam Smith alluded to this when he wrote his book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. I mean, Smith was trying to determine, why is it that some nations in history are wealthier than others? I mean, like you take my hometown where I grew up in Laredo, Texas, it's divided from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico by the Rio Grande. Well, on the southern side of the Rio Grande, you've got just mass poverty. On the northern side of the Rio Grande in Laredo, you've got a fairly good standard of living. Why is this? I mean, it's just a river dividing one great big metropolitan area. Well, the idea is that as people have more economic liberty, there is more prosperity. And this is what was happening throughout the 1800s, that you start out with basically an impoverished society, and then as people are free to accumulate wealth, they start saving that money. And they start putting it away. Now, sure, they consume some of it, but they don't consume all of it. That some of that goes into capital. Imagine, here's a thought process for you, thought exercise. Suppose we libertarians had been successful 10 years ago in getting the income tax eliminated. Now, think about how much, in the Social Security tax, Medicare, the whole kit and caboodle of all these socialist taxes. Now, what does that mean? Let's assume that, I don't know how much you make, but let's say that you've paid an average of $20,000 a year in income taxes for the last 10 years. That would mean that you would be sitting with, 10 years, $200,000 in your bank account, plus interest. Now, that's not a small chunk of change. That's $20,000 income taxes times 10 years, $200,000. Now, that's a fairly large sum of money that you can use to buy health insurance, that you can use to pay for your children's education if you want to send them into private schools or whatever, or save for their college bills. In other words, it's not a small amount of money. You might go and spend the money. Suppose you all of a sudden you got 200 grand right now that you weren't expecting. You won the lottery. Well, you might go on vacation. You might buy a car. But the probability is you'd save some of it, maybe pay off your home mortgage or whatever. Well, this is what people were doing throughout the 1800s. They were saving their money. Now, what does that have to do with abolishing poverty? Well, what was happening was that this savings was going into capital, which was making people more productive. And in other words, it was enabling them to produce more, which was then raising standards of living. And the outcome of all this was that was the only way you can raise standards of living, was by increasing productivity. And the way that you increase productivity is through the accumulation of capital. Now let me give you an example of this. Suppose you got a farmer that has employed, let's say, 10 people, and they're all working with hoes on the farm, and they're planting the seeds physically. They're putting them in there. They're keeping the weeds out with the hose and so forth. And let's say they produce 1,000 bushels of wheat. Well, the farmer pays them, I don't know, let's say, $1,000 for their labor, and the farmer makes $5,000. Well, in profits. Well, after a period of time, the farmer thinks, if I bought a tractor, though I could maybe, quintuple my output, the revenues, the profits, and so forth. But he says, the tractor's going to cost me $10,000, and all I got's five. So he goes to the bank, and he tells the bank his problem, and the bank says, well, I got the solution. That those 10 employees that you have, they just came and deposited some of their savings with me, and those savings amount to $5,000, and we can loan you the $5,000, and with the $5,000 of savings that you have, you can go buy that tractor. You pay us back later. So the bank, of course, is paying interest to the depositors, your 10 employees. The farmer's paying interest to the bank. That's why they're doing this thing. And so he goes out and buys the tractor. He shows the employees how to use it, and all of a sudden, sure enough, the wheat production goes up to 5,000 bushels of wheat. Well, now his revenues increased, his profits are increased. Oh, and by the way, so has the wage rates of the workers. Now, is this because the farmer is a good guy, benevolent, caring, compassionate? No, because the reason he's doing it is just through competitive processes. That, all the businesses around there are doing the same thing. And the ones that are making the money are going to start bidding away the workers. And the workers are no different from workers, anywhere else. They look around, see how much people are making, and if the disparity gets too large, they go and say, hey, I'm out of here. Unless you can match it, I got to go. I got a family to support and so forth. And so it's this whole process that starts raising everybody's standard of living, of capital accumulation, savings. Now, notice how this compares to the statists. What do the statists say is the solution to prosperity and higher standards of living? They say the exact opposite. They say the solution is to go out and spend all your money. Don't save any of it. Let's assume you got, let's say, $20,000 saved up. Well, what do they tell you to do with it? Don't they say, go to the mall, go to the mall, hey, get the economy going? You see this on the mainstream press, the television stations, the commentators, the public officials, President Obama at Christmas time, go to the mall, please go to the mall, please stimulate the economy, spend, spend, spend. Well, suppose you go and you take that $20,000, don't tell your spouse, you keep it a secret, like a surprise, and go to the mall and spend the whole $20,000. Buy new clothes, buy computers, iPads, stereo systems, whatever you buy to your heart's content. And when you come home, surprise your spouse and say, honey, I just, made the family wealthier today. I went out and spent all our savings. And then, of course, your spouse is going to look at you and say, you did what? Oh, yeah. Mr. Obama told me that we would be really wealthier if we just go out and spend. And he told me to go to the mall. And that's where I did. I went and spent all our money at the mall. And your spouse says, well, wait a minute. What about we were saving up to have a down payment on a house. We were saving up for the college kids educate and the kids' college education. Oh, no, don't worry. Don't get too complicated on me now. I went to the mall and I spent. Well, of course, this is idiocy. I mean, it's absolute idiocy. I mean, anybody can see it's idiocy. But that's the idiocy that's on the mainstream newspapers, in the programs, and the public officials, and so forth. And of course, they say the same thing about the government. I mean, that's what the stimulus is all about. Oh, stimulate the economy, And they're talking about government spending. Well, guess what the government's doing? It's using the income tax to take your money and then go spend it on some kind of, public works project or something. Something is a dead-end kind of thing that doesn't increase productivity at all. It's just a redistribution of wealth from your pocket into some guy that's digging a ditch somewhere or building a road somewhere. Or they'll debase the currency so that your $20,000 in savings is now worth $10,000 in purchasing power. And they call this prosperity. They think they can alter this natural system that where you have natural accumulating wealth, people are saving, accumulating capital, building their standard of living over time. The politicians, the statists think, oh, no, we can alter this, we can tamper with it, we can debase the currency, and of course, all they do is impoverish people. And that's what we're going through now. I mean, you've got decade after decade after decade of where the government has just been taxing and spending, taxing and spending, taxing and spending. And as things are cratering now, they sit there and say, golly, what's causing this? Woe is us, and as if it were some kind of like flu that just happened to hit, because they can't accept the fact that it's their statism. The socialism, the income taxation is part of that socialism, the interventionism, the empire, and so forth. In other words, all the things that the income tax funds. That this is what is causing our nation to go down. And so what we really have to be talking about is how do we bring it back? How do we restore this thing, and what are the benefits of restoring it? For doing that, we need to confront reality. I mean, remember I told you in the very first program of this show is that that's part of what this show is about. I mean, we libertarians are like therapists, because we make people face reality. This is something that liberals and conservatives hate. They want to convince themselves that this is a free society. This is, free enterprise, America's free enterprise, America's free enterprise. And then they get their kids in those public schools and they just ingrain it in their heads, this is America's free enterprise, America's free enterprise. And so they resent us because we're coming up here and telling young people it's all a lie. They're lying to you in those public schools. They're lying to you at home. This is not free enterprise. This is a statist economy. It's got socialism mixed in with mercantilism, with interventionism, with regulation, with imperialism, and it's all one great big statist mess. And, how'd this happen? Well, at the turn of the 20th century, you've got the income tax coming into existence. You've got the Federal Reserve, the central bank. That comes into existence. And then, of course, you've got the turn toward empire, the Spanish-American War, which, starts the U.S. government's more than a century-long obsession with dominating and controlling Cuba, even to the point where they embark on decades of assassination attempts and cruel embargo against the Cuban people and anything. I mean, I've never seen such an obsession with controlling and dominating a foreign country as I've ever seen with Cuba. And then, of course, but that mindset of control and domination start to expand. You've got World War I, where they go in there and fund that thing with the income tax. Tremendous assault on civil liberties here at home. And that was, in fact, where the Espionage Act was enacted, which they're trying to get Julian Assange on and Bradley Manning. And this was, of course, the war to end all wars, remember? The war to make the world safe for democracy. I mean, was that a joke? I mean, tens of thousands of American men totally wasted and, funded by the income tax. And then you've got, the continuation of that war, World War II. And then, of course, that was the watershed for the big military-industrial complex, the National Security Act, the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, the Cold War, perpetual crises, perpetual fear, the missile gap, and the dominoes are going to fall. And, of course, all the time, the military-industrial complex, like a cancer, just grows and grows and grows. And libertarians are big culprits. I mean, conservatives are big culprits here. I mean, they were calling all this junk defense. Oh, the only reason we're favoring big government is because we favored defense. Well, it wasn't defense. It was empire. Today we've got, more than, somewhere 700 to 1,000 military bases all over the world, 130 countries or so. They call that defense, invading, wars of aggression, occupation, assassinations. I mean, it's just totally out of control. And it's all funded by this income tax. And of course, how do they keep people pacified with? Keep people calm so they don't get like the people in the Middle East outraged and angry over what's going on. Well, that's where the welfare comes in. I mean, these people are not dumb. Statists are not dumb. I mean, they got to figure out some way, while, all this death and destruction is going on overseas, and people are making a killing off the military-industrial complex. And I'm not talking about just the soldiers and all those people that are on the dole. I'm talking about all the people that receive money, from the supplies and the weaponry and all this. I mean, there's a large segment of the population that is dependent on that military dole. And then, of course, you've got all the military bases here in the United States where, every city that's got one lives in fear that they're going to cancel the base and so forth. But to keep everybody mollified over the out-of-control spending and the taxes, well, that's what the welfare state's all about. I mean, can you imagine somebody on Social Security really fundamentally calling for a reordering of the whole system where you abolish the income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare tax, the whole kit and caboodle, and leave people free to make these decisions on their own? Or Medicare recipients, or people on education grants or community grants. And I mean, this is why they put people on the dole. It weakens them. It weakens their moral fiber. It makes them dependent on the government, where they start looking at the government as their daddy or their mommy. That's why they call it a paternalistic state. Because people, they may be 40, 50, 60 years old, but they look at themselves as little children, adult children that's looking upon their daddy, and they defer to authority, and whatever the government says, that's what's going to go. And we can't, they'll get angry over the bureaucracy, or some inefficiency in government, or the military's buying some expensive toilet seat or something. But in terms of a real paradigm shift, where we're restoring the principles of liberty and limited government on which our nation was founded, no income tax, no immigration controls, no drug laws, no economic regulations, no Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I mean, people say, oh my gosh, what happened to the poor? Oh, they'd starve to death. And I mean, people lose their sense of what it means to be free. And then the conservatives and the liberals compound this problem by convincing children and convincing themselves that they are free. I mean, that's the best slave you could ever have. The slave who thinks he's free. I mean, just think, if you had to own a slave, wouldn't you want a slave that thought he was free? I mean, he'd be sitting there thanking you for his freedom, which is what a lot of Americans say. Thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free. Right? And they thank the government, they thank the troops for making them free. Because they honestly believe this. They live under this falsehood, this deception, this delusion that the welfare state, the warfare state is all freedom. And, of course, it's all funded by the income tax. The worst part, or one of the worst parts, bad parts of this whole thing, is how the income tax has inverted the relationship of the individual to the government. I mean, before income taxation for more than 100 years, the individual was sovereign. I mean, imagine how sovereign and supreme you would feel if you kept everything you earned, there was no IRS, there was nothing the government could do about it. You'd feel pretty sovereign and supreme, But so, the government would be in a subservient position, which is where it should be. That's what's in the Declaration of Independence. To secure these ends, governments are instituted among men. But the income tax inverted that relationship. It turned it upside down. No one can deny, at least if they face reality, that the government's in charge. The government's in charge of the citizenry. It orders, it controls, it dominates. The citizen's job is to serve. His job is to be the good little citizen, support the troops, support the bureaucrats, support his public officials, defer to their authority, defer to their expertise, and go along. Okay, they can carp a little bit and so forth, but no fundamental changes. Don't even think critically. Don't even think independently. And part of this is because, the government lets us have our allowance. And if the government gets mad at us, like a parent, he may reduce our allowance. In other words, you've heard the concept of national income. Well, that's effectively what they did. Remember when they nationalized gold? When Roosevelt, imagine, here was as I said in a previous program, here was the medium of exchange people were using, gold coins and silver coins, Americans. That was their money. That was what the gold standard meant. It wasn't, a certain amount of paper money exchanges for gold. That had nothing to do with the gold standard. The gold standard was simply saying that Americans would choose gold and silver coins, copper coins, for their medium of exchange. So people use gold and silver coins. And this is another reason for the prosperity that was going on. Well, the government nationalized it. That's effectively what they did with income, with the income tax. They nationalized everybody's income. And then they set the percentage. The Congress sets the percentage, the president signs it, and they can change the percentage whenever they want. And sometimes they're nice to their little children in the allowance. They let them keep more. Sometimes they're not so nice and they let them keep less. But they are in charge. They decide, they make the call as to how much you are going to be permitted to keep out of your money. I mean, the more honest system, really, at least the one that would more reflect what's happening, is where everybody sends their money to Washington, 100%, all their income, and then Washington sends you back a check for your allowance, because that's effectively what's happened. That's what happened with the advent of the income tax. It made the citizens subservient, nationalized income, made people dependent on what's going on here. Now, what has been the result of this? Well, it's been a disaster. I mean, for one thing, you've got all this class conflict, rich versus poor, employer versus employee, exploitation of the worker, all this Marxian crud that you hear. And it's legalized plunder, where you've got sectors of society trying to get into people's pocketbooks and doing their best to protect their own pocketbook. I mean, you know how every April 15th people look for their little deductions and, wait, I got a deduction here, and hey, I got a deduction there, and they send their lobbyists to Washington and, about, well, how can we get more, deductions and from our select group, and how can we get more tax credits? And, well, what's that all about? Well, it's about people trying to protect their income. But you've got an entire sector of society, including many people who are, watching their own pocketbook from being plundered, who are trying to get into everybody else's pocketbook. That's what the welfare warfare state's about. How can I get into somebody else's pocketbook without them getting into my pocketbook? I mean, essentially we're at war with each other. Everybody's at war. The congressmen, how they're viewed as effective, an effective congressman, is how much money he brings back to his district. Now, that's the way the mainstream press looks at this. It's the way every statist looks at it. Oh, well, our congressman is really effective. We've got to oust all these congressmen, but not ours, because ours is effective. He's bringing home the bacon. Well, what are they saying with that? What they're saying is that he is plundering and looting Americans and the rest of the country, while presumably protecting the taxpayers from this country from getting looted by the other congressmen who are doing the same thing. I mean, that's what this system has done. It's how insidious, how evil it is, because it's turned citizen against citizen, group against group, and everybody just smiles at each other, and everybody goes along peacefully, acting like everything's cool and hunky-dory and blessing each other at church every Sunday. But boy, all of a sudden they get out there and everybody's trying to get into everybody else's pocketbook. That kind of thing doesn't happen when you don't have this income tax that enables this to go on. I mean, another good example of this is the inheritance tax. It's envy, it's covetousness. I mean, this is one of the commandments. And this is what's so fascinating when I hear Christians say, oh, we got to have an income tax because it's not fair that some people have more when others have less. They go to church on Sunday where they recite the 10 commandments, and they say, oh, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. But, what's the inheritance tax? Well, and the income tax too. What's that all about? It's about envy. It's about coveting. Oh, it's not fair that they have more. Oh, that people are going to inherit a large amount of money. Oh, take it away from them. And they don't even care whether, it's equalized. I mean, the socialists believe in equality, and that's what Castro's all about. That's what his socialist system was all about, taking from the rich and redistributing it. But here, people are just happy just to take it from the rich. And whether it's, just equalized downward. As compared to the system that was existing for more than 100 years, where you had wealthy people. They were tremendously wealthy people, but at the same time you had a strong middle class, many of whom were becoming wealthy, and then you had the poor people flooding American shores from Italy and France and China and Japan that were flooding American shores from all over the world that wanted to become part of the middle class and part of becoming wealthy. They do it through the market process as compared to now where you look to the government to to get, plunder and loot and largesse and so forth. So it funds this welfare state mentality. It funds all and that's evil. I mean, you're turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, citizen against citizen. How can you have a moral system that's based on covetousness, envy, equalization of wealth? There's just no possibility of that. It destroys the concept of charity. They teach us that Social Security is charity and Medicare is charity because you're helping your parents and you're helping the poor and the needy with health care. This is nonsense. How can you have charity that's mandatory, that's coerced, that you go to jail for, that you get audited for by the IRS, one of the scariest agencies in history? How can that be reconciled with genuine charity? Charity means coming out of the goodness of your heart, the willingness of your heart. You want to help your parents. They got cancer. They need some help. Their business went under. That's where life gives you that opportunity to repay them for what they've done for you. But Social Security destroys that. It plunders and loots the young people who are struggling to start a living. It gives the money to people, many of whom don't even need it. They're wealthier people. It destroys this concept of family values, of where families are coming together, or if there's no children in a family, community values, church values. This is what America was once all about. Before there was Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, remember during that entire period where there was no income tax? It was not only the most prosperous nation in history, it was the most charitable. When people were free to accumulate wealth, they donated it, they shared it. This is how the museums got built, the libraries, the opera houses, the churches. It was all voluntary, and it wasn't done because of an income tax deduction, because there was no income tax. And so this is the other insidious evil thing that this system has done. It's destroyed or severely damaged this concept of genuine charity, voluntary charity, helping out your neighbor on a voluntary basis with your own money. Not claiming credit because some IRS agent has terrified a person into paying his taxes by virtue of some law that's been passed by Congress and signed by the president. Where they say, well, everybody's good in America because they're part of the socialistic welfare state. Well, that's ridiculous. It's the root of evil when you've got a system like this of coercive, mandatory redistribution of wealth that denies people the opportunity to do what they want with their own money, including sharing it and donating it and helping other people out. And the other thing is this sense of dependency. We've all grown up with this thing. We've been born, okay? We've been born and raised under a welfare state, which is the flip side to the income tax, because the income tax funds the welfare state along with the warfare state. And we've all been born and raised in this thing, and so we've got this sense of dependency. Oh, we couldn't survive without the income tax. We couldn't survive without the welfare state and all these welfare state programs, without the huge military-industrial complex and the empire and the military and nonsense. This is what we Americans need to do. As other people around the world are starting to question principles on democracy, we need to step it up to a higher level. We need to start restoring our sense of pride, our sense of self-esteem, our sense of self-reliance, our sense of can-do, that we can do it, that our ancestors were right when they embraced the concept of economic liberty. If they could do it for more than 100 years, without income taxation and all these welfare state programs and imperialist programs and warfare state programs, we certainly can too. But it's a psychological problem. We got to restore this concept of can-do, of belief in ourselves and belief in voluntary charity and faith in ourselves and faith in other people, faith in God, faith in the natural processes of life as compared to faith in coercion and faith in government to do these kind of things. And in a sense, people have made the federal government their other god, like their alternative god. That, hey, God and government working together, in partnership with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, I hate to burst anybody's bubble on the Christian side, but God doesn't accept those kind of partners. There's only one God. And he's a jealous God. And he doesn't need partners, especially ones that use coercion and mandates when it comes to charity. That's what free will is all about. That's what voluntary choice is all about. And this is what the welfare state and the income tax have done to the American people. It's damaged their sense of self-esteem and self-reliance and voluntary charity. And now, of course, there's also the warfare state. I mean, this is remember I said the root of evil? I mean, this was taken, by the way, this title, this theme that I've been using from the title of a book from a libertarian named Frank Shodorov. And Shodorov is a fascinating guy, and he wrote a great book called The Income Tax, Root of All Evil. And Shodorov, has been a big influence on me on methodology. A lot of people think, we got to go convert people and to libertarianism. Well, I don't think so. I don't think you can convert people. People got to convert themselves. What Shodorov said is, we got to find the libertarians. And, I'm concluded that he's right. You find the libertarians, find the people that are just naturally, they want to be free. They're willing to fight to be free. They want to learn the understanding, the principles of freedom. And then you start mounting your numbers, and you get larger and larger and larger until you reach a critical mass that then overcomes the status. And to me, that's much more constructive in terms of finally prevailing than to spend your time trying to, convert some status that's, usually incorrigible. I mean, I don't know if it's in the DNA or what. But you've got this huge warfare state. This is the other part of this thing, this empire. You want to see the evil of this thing? Look at Egypt right now. Now, we've been saying this at the Future of Freedom Foundation for, umpteen years, 21 years, that this foreign aid, how America, the government tries to, all the public schools and the state-supported universities, they teach, American government is exceptional, it loves democracy. And, well, we keep saying this is delusionary. It's a lie. It's false. The U.S. government is one of the biggest, strongest supporters of dictators. They love dictators, especially military ones. It's kind of a fascinating phenomenon. They love military generals running countries as long as they're part of the empire. And as soon as a dictator goes independent, that's when they say, we need democracy in that country. We need a regime change. And, they supported Saddam Hussein for years. They were partners with him. And then he turned independent. They go after him. The reason they've gone after Fidel Castro for 50-something years is not because he's a socialist, because they like his socialism, public schooling, welfare, Social Security, and so forth. The reason they went after him is because he went independent. And in Egypt, right now, these people that are protesting, like in Tunisia, they're protesting against dictators that the U.S. government has supported. And guess how they've supported them? With military armaments. Those tanks out there that are being used to intimidate people, the bullets that are being used to fire at people, the airplanes that are being used to intimidate the citizenry, U.S. government supplied. And guess where the money came from to supply those armaments to those dictatorial regimes? You got it, the income tax. That's the root of this evil, of the support that's gone to these dictators that they're now using, they have been using for 30 years or something, against their own citizenry. That's the trade that the U.S. has been making with these dictators. We'll give you the armaments, we'll give you the support to maintain control, stay in office, get your family in office, all your cronies, make a lot of money, push down, hold down your citizenry. Who cares what their standard of living is like, as long as you can stay in office. But when we need a vote in the United Nations, when we need a coalition of the willing, we want to be sure that you're there for us. And that's how the trade's been working. In fact, what's going on in Egypt today, Tunisia, it's a repeat of what happened in Iran, where the U.S. government, with income tax supported money, supported the Shah of Iran, put him into office, ousted the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, put in the Shah, supported his dictatorial regime, his torture, his terrorism against his own citizens, until they ousted him from power. This is what the income tax has done. It's the root of evil because of what it's done to the American people domestically. It's the root of evil because of what it's done overseas. Invasions, occupations, empire, bases, support of dictatorships, oppression. This is their legacy. This is the legacy of more than 100 years of this system. And so now we've got two paradigms to choose from. You got the paradigm under which we're living, the statist one, income taxation, welfarism, warfarism, empire, militarism, the military-industrial complex, all the dependency, the class conflict, the covetousness, versus the paradigm over here of natural rights, God-given rights, keeping what you earn. You decide what to do with it. Charity, saving, investing, spending, consumption. You make the call. That's the conflict we have today. That's why this conflict is really not between liberals and conservatives. They're on the statist side. The real conflict we have is libertarianism versus statism. And of course, you know where I come out on this thing. You know that's where libertarianism. Now, coming up at the Future of Freedom Foundation, we've got our Economic Liberty Lecture Series next month. If you're not subscribing to our FFF email update, just send us an email to fff.org. Subscribe to email update. It's free. If you're not donating to our cause, we hope you will. You get tax-deductible donation. It's the only way we can make it is if those of you support us. We're a tax-exempt organization. We're going to be at CPAC again. Now, yeah, you're saying, hey, Jacob, what are you doing with all those conservatives over there? Well, we're going to be on the same row as all the Ron Paul group there like we were last year. We're going to have a blast there. If you want to come, I hope you'll consider it. We really had a good time last year. I mean, spreading libertarianism among conservatives. It's an interesting process. And the Campaign for Liberty, one of the Ron Paul-inspired groups, they've asked Jim Bovard and me to be the panelists on a panelism on why the Patriot Act should be repealed. Last year it was why conservatives should reject the war on terrorism. And we had an overflow crowd there. And, it stirred up a lot of... interest among all these 10,000 conservatives. So if you want to come, go to the Campaign for Liberty website. You can register there. I don't know if they have discounts. I think they might, but just look at their site for registration. For details, look at the email update. I think it's February 10th. It's not this coming week, but it's the week after that. It's in D.C. And we had a good time. Last year we were on Liberty Row. And where all the libertarian organizations were, and that's where all the people were too, at least all the young people. So we had a blast, and I'm going to do this show that week live. Jim Bovard's going to be a guest on my show. We're going to do it together, and so you got two libertarians in the midst of all this conservatism, and then we're going to do the panel the next day on Saturday. So it's going to be a blast. So if you want to register, go over there to the Campaign for Liberty's website. Just look up CPAC, and I hope you can make it. We're going to have a good time. I'd like to recommend some books. If you're brand new to libertarianism, I'd like to introduce you to a few books to get. First of all, just come to our website and buy our books. I mean, we got some really basic books on libertarian principles, immigration, trade, education, war on terrorism, and so forth. But, I would recommend Economic Policy, which is a book by Ludwig von Mises. It's a series of essays, speeches that he gave in Argentina many years ago. It's a great little introduction to economics, inflation and socialism and so forth. I would recommend Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, Frederick Bastiat's The Law, and I think there was one more. I can't think of it offhand. Economic Policy. Those are three. Those are three to get started. And, of course, anything by Mises, anything by Hayek is fantastic. But if you're brand new to libertarianism, that's where to start out. And, of course, come to our website and the other libertarian organizations' websites. So, again, it was a great time to be with you. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much again. So long.